Americans let China freely plunder the United States economy and take the crown jewels of American industry. Now we are finally responding to years of chronic trade abuses by defending our workers with tariffs and anything else that's necessary, because nobody's going to steal our businesses, nobody's going to close our factories, and nobody's going to close our plants anymore. They're all coming back.
Peter Liebhold of the Smithsonian's American History Museum. President Trump has popularized the debate over tariffs in our country once again. But how long throughout our history have tariffs been a subject of big political debate?
Well, tariffs really have been a topic of discussion from the beginning. That tariffs make great rhetoric, really power people up, and one can argue that in fact the United States was founded on a tariff battle, not American tariffs, but opposition to English tariffs.
We're going to spend some time, we started asking questions about ourselves, about that tariff debate, and thought we'd bring the audience along to learn a little bit more about the role of tariffs in American history, and appreciate you doing this. Before we get into the meat of this, what exactly is a tariff?
Well, a tariff at its most base level is a tax. But there are many different kinds of tariffs. So you'll hear about protectionist tariffs, you hear about retaliatory tariffs, revenue tariffs, punitive tariffs. But at the end of the day, the difference between those tariffs is really minimal. It really depends on whether you're paying the tariff or you're paying for the tariff. The most basic level, there are two ways that tariffs are adjudicated. One is that it's a percentage of the cost of the item that's being imported, and the other is a fixed cost. So when the United States was first founded, most of the tariffs were about 5% of the value of an object coming in. There were some things that were actually specific. So if it was, I think, 10 cents on a gallon of wine, and it really didn't make any difference if it was good wine or bad wine, it was still 10 cents a gallon.
So overall, with regard to tariffs, are there, in general sense, winners and losers as segments of society when they're imposed?
Tariffs are really fascinating in that they're very mysterious. Really, I think I like analogies, and thinking about tariffs is thinking about a big plate of spaghetti. And everybody loves spaghetti, and tariffs are very complicated and difficult to understand, and it's almost impossible to pull a strand of spaghetti out of the plate without touching the others. And depending on your perspective, different people have really remarkably different ideas about whether they're effective or not effective. People argue about that forever. They are taxes. So it's very unclear. One thing that's absolutely clear about tariffs is the rhetoric about tariffs is extremely successful. And this is something that politicians throughout the history of this country have used very effectively to get elected, being in favor of or being opposed to tariffs.
Well, before we get into the founding of the nation and the tariff battles at our earliest days, I wanted to learn a little bit more about you. So you've spent much of your career at the American History Museum. What's your job there?
I'm a curator. I take care of a variety of different collections, the manufacturing collections, the agricultural collections, a few others. But probably even more important in terms of this topic is I'm the project director for the American Enterprise exhibition, which is our exhibit that looks at the history of the nation, of the people, through the story of business and working people.
At this network, we talk to a lot of academic historians. You're a public historian. What do you see as your role, your mission?
Well, my job as a public historian is to get people excited about history, get people excited about thinking and learning. And it's really not, the mission isn't so much to tell people what's right or wrong or specific dates, but to make them understand that any topic is complicated and involved. And tariffs are probably the perfect example of this, in that no one understands tariffs. Even the people involved will occasionally own up to the fact that they're very hard to decipher. But for the public, what's really important is to know that tariffs have huge effects, and it's very unclear what those effects will be. So unintended consequences really are associated with tariffs quite often.
Since the Trump administration has brought tariffs back to the forefront, have you changed the way you talk about them in your exhibition?
No, the Smithsonian is apolitical. We're really, it's important for us to represent all sides of the argument. So we're excited that people are interested in tariffs because it's a business story and it makes people lean in a little bit more. But we really are not influenced by any one group's interests for or against something.
But if people are generally more interested in the topic, do you make it easier to find that part of the exhibition now?
I think what you find is that people, as topics change, that different portions of the exhibition become more engaging, and if you go down and listen to people's conversations, they're sometimes a little more heated than they might have been in the past.
We have a few of the items as we talk during this next hour, and we'll look at some of those, and you can explain how they help tell the story of tariffs. But how did you get started in all this?
In terms of business history?
Yeah, and your interest in doing this for a living, for a profession.
Well, for me, if you're interested in technology, I'm an historian of technology, the aspect of it that touches people, how their lives are changed by technological innovations is really important. The role of business in that story is complicated, and for me as an historian, that complication is really delightful. That understanding history is very gray, as murky as maybe occasionally a conspiracy is actually true, that people have alternative motives and will do things, say one thing and do something else. And it's just great learning experiences that you can apply to the future. What
sparked your initial interest in taking this direction in your history studies?
Well, I've always done industrial history, that I'm a big fan of big, heavy, greasy things. And being able to do industrial history really requires you to look at business, to think about it, who the people are, how labor is being formed, giving agency to all the participants. That economists are great people. They write wonderful books that are filled with numbers and are often correct. But for an historian, understanding that humanistic part of it, the anecdote of a specific object, why at the World Trade Center, at the World WTO, the protests in 1990 in Seattle, why they were marching in turtle suits is just a fascinating time.
So let's go back to the founding. You made the point that the nation was really born in the debate over tariffs. What's your point there?
Well, the United States, trade is what's really important. Tariffs are, of course, a huge element of trade because they're become a bar to importing and occasionally exporting more. The United States, as a set of largely British colonies, was interested in trade. It existed in a mercantile system, so that the British were saying you must send all your raw goods back to the mother country, we'll turn it into finished goods, and then we'll send it back to you and you can buy it at a higher price. And people wanted to trade. They wanted to do the value added. They wanted to be able to trade not only with England, but be able to trade with Germany, with Australia, with China. We have a big section in our American Enterprise exhibition that looks at the China trade in the 1840s. And there were a series of tariffs that were put onto citizens of the U.S. The Stamp Act would be one example, that you had to pay a tax for any type of document. Tea had a huge bounty that was put on it, and
which led to the Boston Tea Party.
Correct. So that Americans were unhappy about having to pay for that extra tax that was putting on their tea, and sometimes they sent it back to England. Sometimes they locked it up in warehouses. In the case of Boston, In a violent act, they destroyed the tea and threw some of it into the harbor.
In the colonial period, was the United States really a producer of anything other than agricultural products?
Well, the United States...
it wasn't the United States yet, so to be correct, we're the colonies.
The British colonies, yes. Right. The British colonies were certainly exporting a lot of food goods. Wood was very important. But trade itself was very important. That shipbuilding, because of the amount of wood, of skilled craftsmen, you could build ships, and being part of that trade. So we always talk about merchants. Our first section of our exhibition is the merchant era, which is the 1770s to the 1850s. And we call that the merchant era. And what we're saying is not merchants in the notion of somebody behind a store counter, but a merchant in terms of a trader, somebody who's buying cargoes and moving it around. And so the colonists were very involved. Some were very involved in merchant trade. Of course, most of them were in agriculture. At the time of Jefferson, which is much later, this is well after the country is founded, probably about 80% of all Americans were involved in agriculture in one form or another.
So if people are to understand the roots of the American Revolution, would you say they were in equal parts political and economic about trade?
There really are many different causations for the revolution, but the United States, the culture of the U.S. has really had a very fine look at business, at making money, at creating opportunities throughout its history. One of the things that our exhibition does is it argues that there are really four big ideas for the United States, for thinking about the mentality, what drives people. And that's the notions of opportunity, innovation, competition, and common good. These are sort of the credos, the heartfelt basis of the people of the United States that separate them to a great degree from many other countries. And that notion of opportunity is really, at its heart, American capitalism. And the notion of common good at its heart is really American democracy. And that those strong really pushes for independence, for liberty, leave me alone, those great things are felt in that notion of democracy, but also opportunity, the chance to make money and do things.
One of the items from your exhibit that we want to show people from that period is a teapot that it has insignias of the Stamp Act. How would this have been used in society at that time?
Well, this is just a wonderful piece on so many different levels. This is the English actually selling the fact that they're in trouble, because the Stamp Act, of course, was much vilified in the U.S. and so people had an option of what types of pots they were going to have for their tea. Tea was a very important drink in the U.S. and this was a piece that represented that political thought, that tea drinking is often associated with politics, with interchange about ideas and concepts. But what makes this delightful in a way is that it's actually made in England and was made for export. And so at the time, the Industrial Revolution is taking place, mechanization is taking off, and the potteries in England are becoming bigger and bigger, and they need to expand their market. And so they're very interested in appealing to anybody around the world. The American market is certainly substantial, and so they make things that are actually lampooning themselves in order to make a sale. And so there are sort of many levels of interest involved in that single object.
Another piece from that period is a dress that is ascribed to Martha Washington.
Right. This is a great dress. Her gown. This is Chinese silk, and silk, of course, this time is imported, And it really talks to that international kind of trade. And if you look at the early period in the United States, there was a lot of conversation about the cult of homespun, of making a thread, of weaving fabric, and that this is a very American kind of ideology. And by the 1850s, Americans are looking back somewhat nostalgically, romantically at an earlier period in the late 1700s, and talking about this age of homespun, of the Yankee woman spinning cotton, spinning silk or whatever, and making fabric. But that dress goes to speak to the fact that international trade, even in the time of George Washington, is very significant and important.
So if you were a politician of the era, George Washington, Jefferson, Adams, your choice of clothing fabric might be a political statement?
Oh, absolutely. If you look at Benjamin Harrison's wife, her gown that she wears to the inaugural of Harrison is silk, but it's woven in the United States, and it's emblazoned with icons of the nation, of the bur oak and things like that. Keeley is a congressman, very big protectionist. He was very careful to always wear clothing that was American made, only by America. And the notion of America first, American made, made in the USA, is something that's been around for quite some time.
So what are we to make of the fact that the first substantive piece of legislation passed by the Congress when we had signed our Constitution to become a nation on July 4th, 1789, signed into place by President Washington, placed a 5% tariff on most imported goods?
Yep, well, that totally makes sense because any government needs money to operate. That there's no income tax at this point, and there has to be some source of revenue. And tariffs in this early period, really up until 1913, are revenue. One of the prime needs for them is revenue generating. That if you're going to have a federal government, and of course this is the argument between Hamilton and Jefferson, is how strong should the federal government be. But if you're going to have a federal government, then you need to be able to pay people, you need to be able to build things, you need to be able to do things, and that means funds. Some money is coming from land sales, but revenue from tariffs is one of the big drivers of government.
So Alexander Hamilton is Secretary of the Treasury at that point. He's a leading voice for tariffs. Can you talk about how he promoted the idea and what the political debates were between his group, the Federalists, at the time, and Jefferson's party, who had a very different point of view?
Right. Jefferson, of course, was really a states' rights, really had a different vision for the nation, really seeing the yeoman farmer as the quintessential American, sort of sandwiched between the notion of what Jefferson probably would talk about, the savagery of Native Americans and the evil aristocrats of England, which would be factory workers. What he saw was the yeoman farmer, the connection to the earth as the great thing, and because of that really saw very local control as important. Hamilton, on the other part, really saw manufacturing, saw cities as the future, and as such, creating a economic platform where you have tariffs to protect those infant industries was really critical. And in this time period, infant industries are truly infant, and so that protecting those industries is a reasonable thing. Later on, people use that same rhetoric, but it's a little bit tougher to say whether it's the protectionist measure in later years is as fairly used as a justification for taxes. So
at this period of time, as a general sense, the Jeffersonian Democrats versus the Federalists and then ultimately the Whigs, the Jeffersonian Democrats were low tariff people, and the Federalists and then later the Whigs were high tariff people.
Right. The farmers throughout much of American history, the farmers of the South are not keen on tariffs because they rarely help them. They increase the cost of goods, and occasionally they will protect them. But Jefferson was not for tariffs, and Jefferson was not for creating a big government. So swelling the coffers was not something that he was really keen on. He eventually has to eat his words and becomes a person who puts tariffs into place, but certainly not initially. Hamilton, on the other hand, is looking at supporting the urban Northeast where the factories are located, and the tariffs are protecting them. So that efficiency in the United States, certainly at this point in the late 1700s, is not very great, and cost of labor in the U.S. is always extremely high. This is one of the things, well, maybe the two things that you can say about the U.S. throughout its entire history is that there's a lot of land and there are not many people. And because of that, labor is consistently very high, and in the U.S. people keep turning to new techniques, greater efficiency machines, in order to compete with other countries like England that had lower labor costs.
As we move into the 19th century, a major figure in the early part of that century is Henry Clay. He also had this concept, this economic concept called the American system. What should we know about that period of time, Henry Clay's role, and what his philosophies were?
Henry Clay is a really interesting character. Comes out of Kentucky, and so you would think he would be respecting that Southern kind of notion of being opposed to tariffs. But in fact, he is a protectionist and is really promoting tariffs. Creates in order to get people on board with the idea of tariffs, he argues the American system, which has really three elements to it. One, that you charge these high tariffs that are going to protect industries, that you create a central bank in order to create an economic system that is easier, that you have monetary exchange. And this appeals to both manufacturers, and to a degree it appeals to the Southern growers, the plantation owners, because they, of course, are selling their cotton abroad. But he also promotes infrastructure. And so he says that if we charge these tariffs, if we basically are taxing Americans on these goods, raising their price on the goods, that we'll take that money and we'll turn around and we'll improve canals, we'll build roads, we'll make navigation better, and this in fact will help everybody. And so he puts together this three-part kind of alliance and tries to get people on board. He's a really interesting person, very persuasive, very effective. His campaign medallion from 1844 is one of my favorite things in our exhibition.
Well, let's show it right now, because Henry Clay always had presidential ambitions, never successful at it. But why is this a favorite for you?
Well, to me, it's just a wonderful piece. On the what any numismat would tell you is the front, which is the side that has his face on it. You can see that he's not very telegenic, that he doesn't really have the physique that people warm up to and suddenly say he looks like a great guy. But the averse, the backside, is the part that I love. And this medallion was struck in 1844, and it was a campaign token. You would hand them out and say, "Vote for me." And in the back, you can see that Henry Clay is saying, "Henry Clay, the champion of a protective tariff." And then there's an image, and visual analysis is something that curators love to do. And so looking at this tells you so much about what's going on. You can see the freighter of the time, this three-masted sailing ship. It's flying the American flag. It has the meteor bullet on the top, so you can see what line it is. And then in the foreground, you can see that there's industry. That you've got an agriculture. That you've got a plow with a sheaf of wheat growing hung over it. And the argument being that the protective tariff will help the manufacturers who are shipping their goods, but it will also help the farmer. And this is really a sectional view, because there's something that's not in this image. And what's missing from that image is a bale of cotton. In 1844, the biggest U.S. export is cotton, and you can see that Henry Clay gave up on the South, and instead he's appealing to the West. And so, in thinking about American politics, you always have to remember North and South is really not the case. It's really North, South, and West. And the argument is that if the North does well, the factories do well, more people will have more money, and they will buy more food, and the food is coming from the West. And so he's building an alliance between the farmers of the West and the manufacturers of the North, and largely gives up on the people of the South, who are not going to vote for him anyway.
As a Kentuckian, that's so interesting. So you told us that the average tariffs during the early days of our republic was about 5%, maybe 10%. How high had the tariffs gotten by this period of time in general? They were funding the whole federal government, right?
One of the major sources of income is tariff. It changes at any given time, and it's really interesting to see how as tariffs go up, the revenue goes up, and the federal government budget sometimes swells to a point that it becomes problematic, and they have to figure out how to reduce some tariffs in order to bring it down. It would be an argument that probably Art Laffer would enjoy, because the notion of having too much money for government makes it do things that you don't want. But the period that really starts to make tariffs take off is the War of 1812. That the U.S. is pulled into a war. That the Napoleonic Wars are going on. The U.S. tries to stay neutral, but even with its declared neutrality, that American ships are being pulled in by the English, and sailors are being impressed. They're being taken into duty, and that Jefferson really wants to stop this, creates an embargo that's a total failure, and eventually the War of 1812 breaks out, and for several years the U.S. is at war with England, and after that, the U.S. continues to needs money at the time, of course, so it has tariffs in order to generate revenue to fight a war, but it continues the tariffs at a reasonably high rate because they're in place, and they're starting to protect the textile industries, which are suddenly in trouble. This nascent factory system that was born during the War of 1812, once the war is over and the British can have their more sophisticated operations, they can bring textiles back to the U.S. That the cotton and wool producers in the Northeast are looking for protection, looking for help.
So tariffs are, in fact, as the decades progress, really increasing the sectionalism that's happening in the country.
Absolutely. It's important to, of course, to remember that in the United States, all politics are local. And so while people talk about general trends and aspects of it, at the end of the day, tariffs are very local and very idiosyncratic. And that's why the notion of thinking about tariffs as the pile of spaghetti really makes sense, because sometimes people that you would think would be opposed to a tariff are for them, and sometimes people that are for them are opposed to them because it has a very local, regional kind of sensibility. That tariffs, the creating of a tariff starts not with the president, but starts in the Ways and Means Committee in the House. And so you have representatives who are voted in every 2 years, represent a fairly small district, and they're responding to their, not just the nation, but to what their district needs. And so the notion of pork barrel is something that was true in the past, as it continues to be, and people do favors for each other. So log rolling is what any tariff politician will tell you. Log rolling is the key word, that people are cutting deals. And sometimes the tariffs are for broad national philosophical reasons, but sometimes they're very, very regional, supporting a single operation.
So as the sectionalism increases and leads us to the Civil War, we bring Lincoln into office. Lincoln was a student and great admirer of Henry Clay. He had been a Whig and then became the Republican when the party was founded. Where was Abraham Lincoln on tariffs?
Well, Lincoln was really wanted to keep the Union together and did much to try to do that. But the election of Lincoln sent a very strong signal to the South, to the planters, and that was that their vote was not going to count. That there had been a series of battles. The tariff of abnegations really were so severe that South Carolina, even before Lincoln ran for the presidency, nullified the tariff and said that we're not going to pay for it. And the government, the Union, stepped in with military force to say that you had to. When Lincoln gets elected, it's a sign that the powers for pro-business are very strong, and that those anti-tariff beliefs are probably not going to be pushed as much. With the Civil War, Lincoln has to create revenue in order to fight the war, so that's a real need. But it also means that suddenly the states that had been anti-tariff are no longer at the table. They're no longer able to vote. And so the people that were against tariffs go away, and the political balance changes considerably.
So after Lincoln, then, if you look at the line of presidents from Lincoln all the way up until Herbert Hoover, it was a string of Republican presidents only broken by, Johnson, Cleveland, and Woodrow Wilson. So we're in a very much pro-tariff, protectionist era. How did that contribute to the change in the American economy?
How much you attribute to the tariff and how much you attribute to other factors is always complex, and nobody will ever know. But certainly in the latter half of the 1800s, tariffs are gigantic. That you have really high tariffs, and I would say it's really a question of large tariffs or even larger tariffs. If you're not an era, if you look at the graphs of tariffs, that there's never a period of particularly low tariffs. But manufacturing is beginning to become efficient. By the 1850s, the world is really recognizing the United States as an industrial power, and as such, there's a great desire to protect, to service those manufacturing firms, and the tariffs are one element to it. Now, there's also tremendous improvements. That there's technological change. There's huge investment in industry, and so some of the push forward is coming from those sources as well. And so ascribing too much to tariffs is certainly risky, but it is fair to say that it's a golden period in terms of industry getting its way. Did
they contribute to the rise of the Gilded Age millionaires?
Well, the Gilded Age millionaires certainly were very pleased to have tariffs to protect them. And a great early example would be the building of the Transcontinental Railroad. The Transcontinental Railroad is heavily subsidized by the United States government. Lincoln in office, with the Southern votes away from the table, is able to push through a Pacific Railroad. So the Pacific Railroad Act of 1862 says that the government will give a lot of land, will really encourage things, but by the way, you also have to use only American-made iron and steel in the production of it. So even from sort of great infrastructure projects like that, the American manufacturers are being looked out for by the government.
You talked about the fact that people should know that tariffs, now it's the president who's talking about proposing tariffs, but then it was the House of Representatives, Ways and Means Committee, and the big name of that period was William McKinley. What should we know about his role in this tariff debate?
Well, McKinley never saw a tariff he didn't like. so was a huge proponent of them, and certainly pushed some of the most. The McKinley tariff is one of the most aggressive tariffs going. Interestingly, sometimes tariffs have just amazing effects. The Supreme Court eventually ruled that a tomato is a vegetable and not a fruit because of a tariff. And it seems, it's a sort of odd story. Any botanist will tell you that a tomato is a fruit. But in fact, the 1883 tariff put a tariff on vegetables and not fruits. And so a importer of vegetables, Nix, New York, pointed out that the tomatoes he was bringing in from the Caribbean were fruit, and he didn't have to pay his tariff. The battle went on for quite some time, and eventually the Supreme Court ruled that tomatoes are actually vegetables. And it is an interesting ruling in that it had repercussions beyond just tomatoes themselves.
We have another campaign medallion because William McKinley also had presidential aspirations, and it's another motif in the 88 election. Is that right?
Right. And here you can see that that this notion of being a proponent of a high tariff is something that's really great, is virtuous. And
this is Grover Cleveland versus Benjamin Harrison, and they were on two different sides of it, with McKinley in the background as the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee pushing tariffs. So what are the politics that we're looking at here?
Well, it's really about the West versus the interests of the West and the South versus that of the Northeast, and the story always remains the same of who benefits by the tariffs. There's also, along with the tariff argument at this point, is this notion of immigration, of how open the country should be to people from other countries, and so it starts to become the ideology of tariffs, tax on specific goods, but related to that is the control of people coming in as well.
So if we could go back to those medallions so people could actually see the text on screen, if we can bring those back up again. I want to read. Old Grover, Mayor of Buffalo, New York, Mayor of Buffalo, Governor of New York, favored tariff reduction, a man of destiny. And then of Benjamin Harrison, Backbone Ben, from Colonel to Brigadier General in the Civil War, United States Senator, an exponent of the high protective tariff. When William McKinley became president, was he still as happy about tariffs as he had been?
Oh, he was very happy about tariffs as president. And really, there's the little break in the Republicans' domination only because of very deep depressions, and so the sort of push for tariffs remain. They're always. You often see on things like this the full lunch pail, or if you look at when McKinley runs for the presidency in 1896, his campaign poster has McKinley standing in front of a bank and talking about how he wants to open up the mills to labor. He's speaking out to labor, saying, "We will have more employment. You will have higher jobs, better paying jobs if we have tariffs." That it'll be great for you. Very little appeal to consumers, which is curious. That the tariffs, in theory, will aid manufacturers, which should, in fact, mean more employment and possibly higher wages. But tariffs always end up in greater costs for goods, and relatively little rhetoric about the consumer perspective of. You're going to pay more for your chocolate, or you'll pay more for your plow.
The Republican Party in the 20th century, early 20th century, seems like it started to have a big split over these economic issues. We're going to turn to the voice of Jeffrey Rosen. He's president of the Constitution Center, but he wrote a biography of William Howard Taft. And he tells us a little bit about the big debate in the Republican Party during the 1910s, 1912 eras. Let's watch.
So the tariffs are bubbling as a political issue during his presidency, and it splits the Republican Party. The party had traditionally been devoted to protective tariffs for income but not protection. In other words, moderate tariffs in order to fund the government but not to protect certain industries over the others. But tariffs naturally favored some people over others. Eastern manufacturers, glove manufacturers liked it, and Western farmers didn't because it raised the raw material of goods. So within the Republican Party, there are three camps. There are the stand-pat Republicans led by Speaker Joe Cannon, who want to keep the tariff as it is or even raise it to pander to their constituencies. The insurgent progressive Republicans and independents like Robert La Follette, who want to really lower the tariff, although not eliminate it like the free trade Democrats under Bryan. And then Taft is caught in the middle.
So ultimately, we'll get to the point of the time when the country moves away from tariffs and finds another way to fund the government, which is the income tax. What led to that?
Well, certainly the government needs to have a source of income. Earlier, there were times where the government was really pulling in too much money, and it was creating a bigger government that people wanted.
And had surpluses, right?
And had surpluses, right. And so it was a system that was a little bit out of control, and there was really a lot of conversation about that. It's interesting, we still have somewhat that same notion even today in terms of tax revenues about government programs related to income. It's hidden much more because there's a lot of borrowing, and we don't run on so close to our revenue streams. But imposing income tax totally changed the notion. That the argument for infant industries was long past. That the 16th Amendment, the notion of income taxes is created in a time where it's possible to raise money in a different kind of manner, and will really push the government in a different kind of direction. The Supreme Court had ruled several times earlier that income taxes were illegal, so it was required to have a constitutional amendment to make it pass. So
if we move then to the era of the 1930s, the government is now having an income tax. We've gone through world wars. But FDR comes into office, and how does the policy of the United States change from FDR through most of the 20th century regarding trade and tariffs?
Well, even before FDR comes in, you have to talk about Smoot-Hawley.
Oh, and absolutely.
Smoot-Hawley is
everyone learns that in high school, don't they?
Right. There was an article recently about one of the Smoot relatives suddenly discovering what their genealogy was and being sort of appalled by it. But the historians, economists, politicians all love to argue about the Smoot-Hawley tariff. It's a very draconian one. It really just ups the ante tremendously.
And passed during the Depression.
Well, sort of. That's actually part of the problem. It passes, it's partially passed before the Depression, and then before it's really put into place, then the market crashes. And so it really depends on your definition of depression. And that's actually one of the things that drives it. That the depression, if you think of the Depression, the Great Depression as 1929 and the fall of the stock market and financial collapse, that's one thing. But in fact, agriculture in the United States had been really in very, very bad straits for almost the entire decade. The 1920s are a very bad time for agriculture. And there's a desire to improve things for farmers. And Smoot-Hawley originally is formed as a tariff to generate protection for not manufacturers, but protection for farmers to raise their situation. Unfortunately, once you start taking a bill like a tariff bill to Congress, people jump on board. And the log rolling takes place, and the protection for the farmers people sign on to, but they ask for protection for different kinds of manufacturers. And by the time Smoot-Hawley was put into play, passed and then put into play, the Great Depression had hit, the high bar of tariffs was very destructive. It created retaliation. It stopped international trade, and so was very, very destructive. And fairly quickly, FDR comes into place and starts looking at a different kind of approach of reciprocal trade, where instead of having tariffs that are true for everybody, you have different relationships with different countries. And it's really a different sensibility that becomes kind of defining for us even to today.
So Congress also ceded to the executive branch the power to negotiate these. Why would Congress give up that kind of power?
Well, the Congress hangs on to it. The executive branch gets stronger and stronger. The tariffs that are being charged today by Donald Trump are coming strictly from the White House, and he's using an interesting approach. It's the I think it's the Economic Expansion Act of 1962, and the Congress still has the right to generate tariffs. Any tax bill, any money bill comes out of Congress, but this Economic Expansion Act says the president, in times of national defense, can impose tariffs, and so it's kind of a loophole that's used, and really it's part of this trend of Congress having less power and the executive branch maintaining more power.
Coming out of the Roosevelt administration, there was the creation of the GATT. We hear so much about GATT, the General Agreements on Tariff and Trade, in 1947. But the next and last clip that I want to show you fast forwards us from the 40s, 50s, 60s into the 90s. Mm-hmm. And this is President Bill Clinton on the signing of the NAFTA agreement. Let's watch.
It's an honor for me today to be joined by my predecessor, President Bush, who took the major steps in negotiating this North American Free Trade Agreement, President Jimmy Carter, whose vision of hemispheric development gives great energy to our efforts and has been a consistent theme of his for many, many years now, and President Ford, who has argued as fiercely for expanded trade and for this agreement as any American citizen, and whose counsel I continue to value. These men, differing in party and outlook, join us today because we all recognize the important stakes for our nation in this issue. Today we turn to face the challenge of our own hemisphere, our own country, our own economic fortunes. In a few moments I will sign 3 agreements that will complete our negotiations with Mexico and Canada to create a North American Free Trade Agreement. In the coming months I will submit this pact to Congress for approval. It will be a hard fight, and I expect to be there with all of you every step of the way.
And the year after NAFTA was signed, the World Trade Organization was created in 1994. You mentioned the protests that continue to happen when the World Trade Organization meets. So what interested us about that was the lineup of Democratic and Republican presidents, and Ronald Reagan before him had been an anti-tariff, free trade person. So we continue on this motif all the way through now, but here in the 20-teens, we are questioning whether or not NAFTA was a good idea, and we have a president that's talking about tariffs again. So is this, in fact, all cyclical?
Things definitely come and go. There's no question about that. And everybody always argues about what the cycles are like, and people always try to pick the stock market based on cycles. And if they exist, it's really hard to say. But this philosophical change, Bretton Woods, GATT, World Trade Organization, IMF, is all about creating a different world order. That really, following World War II, recognition that it's no longer just about nations, that we're in a truly global economy and really have to operate in a different kind of way. And I think across these party lines, you see the leaders recognizing that new world order and trying to create a degree, from different perspectives, of stability. That business always likes stability. And today what we're seeing is a fascinating return to nationalism. It was very strong in the late 1900s, in the early 1900s and the late 1800s, and there have been a couple of really, I would point to three big acts that give us a sense of this rising nationalism. First, we saw the rise of Putin in Russia, doing things that are clearly self-destructive to the country, nationalistic in terms of perspective, but it has made its power ever stronger. So a really nationalistic push. Then we had Brexit, which again seems from a business perspective just beyond belief odd. That the British folks would choose to pull themselves out of the EU, but again based on nationalism. And then finally the election of Donald Trump as president on this populist nationalist kind of push, and we really see the rhetoric of nationalism starting to trump globalism. And that people are making decisions that are very emotional and not necessarily always good business sense.
So, and we're also talking about tariffs with regard to China, and you mentioned China as an important trading partner all the way back from the beginning of the country. So how does the China-American tensions play into this?
Well, certainly China, the relationship with China have been ongoing. That when the United States started to trade with China in the 1820s, 1830s, China didn't really want much from the U.S. and the U.S. wanted a lot from China, and that kind of sensibility continues to today. That the nation is not that interested in pulling things in a very insular kind of notion. And so creating a truly a free trade with China is something that has challenged people for quite some time. And there's never been a moment of tremendous free trade with China.
So in our last 4 or 5 minutes here as we sum up, so if we were looking across this history as we have, what are the things that people really should know about the history of tariffs in this country and the role that they have played in the country we've become?
I think tariffs are so intimidating. They're so difficult, so complex. If you go to a party and start talking about tariffs, you guarantee that the people their eyes will roll back and they'll walk away to do something else. It's just not a sexy topic. But in fact, it's really a mistake because tariffs are so fascinating, so interesting. And I think from my perspective, not doing the economic history, but looking at the anecdotes are so revealing. So thinking back on the protests of the WTO, the World Trade Organization, in 1999 in Seattle, what was that all about? That one of the problems as we moved away from politicians that we know and we voted for and we could complain to, that was true in the late 1800s. Now in 1999, you've got nameless bureaucrats at the IMF or the WTO making decisions, and you have no input. And so the icon of the protest were the marching turtles. And everybody thought it was really hilarious and really interesting. But in fact, the reason for those turtle outfits is all about tariffs. That the United States decided that from environmental perspectives, it was important to not buy shrimp from countries that did not put turtle excluders on their nets. That the shrimp would be caught, and without these turtle excluders, you would be killing sea turtles. And so the U.S. passed this tariff that forbade the import of shrimp from those countries. And the WTO said that was an unfair trade practice and said that we had to buy shrimp from those countries. And the marching turtles were in fact activists, really heartfelt people saying that we hold the environment first and that we want to do this over national trade. And so you start to see the complications, the difficulty for these different things. The banana wars would be another great example of how a McDonald's in France is destroyed by farmers who are making cheese over the U.S. practice with bananas in Guatemala. They're very complicated, very interlocked, and people really should dive into tariffs, certainly at this wonderful anecdotal level, in order to have a better sense of how complex it really is.
We had a chance to see a couple of items from your exhibition at the American History Museum here in Washington, and we encourage people to come by and see it if they're visiting the nation's capital. But if you were to choose an iconic object from today's debate over tariffs, do you know what that would be?
Well, there's so many. I mean, the exhibition is chock full of it. But right in the case in the end of the exhibition, there's a bottle of Mexican Coca-Cola, which turns out was hard to collect. But what was important was from 2002, and it's all about trade battles. That Mexico has a big sugar industry, cane industry, and the U.S. is a very efficient grower of corn from which you can make high fructose corn syrup. The U.S. started to export high fructose corn syrup to Mexico. Mexico said this is a bad idea, and they put a levy, a duty, a tariff onto high fructose corn syrup. The U.S. files a protest with the WTO. The WTO rules in favor of the U.S. Mexico then puts a tax onto high fructose corn syrup, and again, the WTO files in favor of the United States, and high fructose corn syrup is allowed to be exported to Mexico. And so that simple bottle of Coke that looks refreshing but innocent, in fact, embodies quite a Herculean battle between forces around the world. And so much of that is true. And by diving into some of these artifacts in our exhibition, I think our visitors will have a better chance of the complexity of the world that they live in.
Well, Peter Liebhold, thank you for taking a very complex topic like tariffs and helping us understand how important they've been in U.S. history.
My pleasure. And I hope that everyone has a chance to come and visit our exhibit and help us think about what new artifacts we should be collecting to represent the ever-changing story.
All Q&A programs are available on our website or as a podcast at cspan.org.